All right, rejoining the channel is our good friend, retired Navy Captain Kevin Hozer Miller, who flew airplanes off of aircraft carriers for the bulk of his career. We've documented how he and I know each other through a number of episodes. And everybody remembers we were a few months ago aboard Harry S. Truman at sea. Hozer is also an author. He's written the Raven 1 series, as well as the historical fiction of the Battle of Midway called The Silver Waterfall. And Hozer, you just buttoned up your latest offering. Is this another in the Raven 1 series or something different?
Hi, Mooch. Great to be with you again. And yes, this will be Flip Wilson's fourth deployment in the Raven One series. Yes, so just finished it yesterday. There's a lot of cutting and sanding and polishing left to do. Of course, I'm looking at releasing it this fall.
Fantastic. Congratulations. I look forward to reading it. We'll also mention that Hozer was the guy behind the Raven 1 DCS campaign. So he's worn many hats that fans of this channel care about. So, Hozer, the other day I'm watching the news, and these days that's a wild ride. And a guy who I've known for a number of years, he's an Army veteran, was on a certain channel talking about who he believed that Kamala Harris would pick as her VP in the weeks to come. And it was, in this case, they were talking about Senator Mark Kelly. And among the attributes that this guy was listing was he was a fighter pilot. And so based on that, I tweeted this, which is, okay, let's get ahead of this, people. Senator Mark Kelly was an attack pilot, not a fighter pilot. And I use this South Park meme that says, it matters, dude. The hue and cry that tweet generated, quite frankly, surprised me. The level of misinterpretation of what I meant, as well as passion about this label, these labels. So I wanted to bring you aboard because you started your life as an A-7 pilot. So when you flew A-7s, what did you consider yourself?
An attack pilot, no question. I mean, the A7, the A6 at the time, all of us consider ourselves attack guys. In my case, at Cecil Field, there were the fighter guys at Oceana. We talked trash in Wardroom 1 and on the ship, and a healthy competition, of course, but in the attack community, no doubt.
I was raised by a Marine Corps attack pilot, as we've documented on the channel, including the interview with my father a couple of years ago. And he used to tell the story about near rumble that happened at the Officers Club at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, that by his accounting, he broke up by breaking a beer bottle on the bar and holding it up and telling the fighter pilots if they came any closer, it was going to get ugly. So he took great pride in his status as an attack pilot. He flew A4s as a junior officer, and then he was the commanding officer of an A-6 Intruder squadron when I was in high school and lived on board Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. So the other thing that people did after I posted that tweet was they assumed that I was being critical and establishing some sort of hierarchy, that by labeling Mark Kelly as an attack pilot, I was somehow connoting superiority with fighter pilots. And that is not at all what I intended. And I had to write a couple of times. I'm not saying that back in those days when we had fighter pilots and attack pilots, that there was some sort of superiority inherent to being a fighter pilot over an attack pilot. I'm saying that there was pride in these labels on both sides, right? Like you've just said, you were proud of being an attack pilot.
And I would imagine that Mark Kelly is proud of being an attack pilot as well, and would identify himself that way, having flown the A-6 Intruder. I think that, again, getting back to our relationship on the ship and elsewhere, it's and in the Navy. I mean, if you're not doing what I'm doing, then you're a second class citizen, and everyone kind of feels that way. And so we would call the guys at Oceana fighter pukes. They called us attack pukes. I mean, the A7 was referred to by the A6 guys even, and as fruit flies. And we'd call the F-14 the flying tennis court. I mean, it's all towel snapping, good fun. I think there's a community pride that because the Navy has those communities. The Air Force culture is different. I did a tour at Tyndall in the mid '90s, which is the F-15 schoolhouse back then, and learn more about this culture. To call everything that goes fast, maybe over 400 knots, just call that a fight. I mean, the F-117, there was nothing fighter about that. That was a pure attack aircraft and really only had one way to attack. It's their culture to call it that. I also remember the F-22, and this is over 20 years ago when Air Force was selling it and Congress had to fund it. The Air Force for I believe a couple of years called it the FA-22. As soon as they got it funded, it went back to the F-22. It's a culture thing.
Like you said, you back in the day, you had TAC, SAC, and MAC. So basically, you had fast movers, you had bombers, and you had transports. Those were the three different divisions within the Air Force. And within TAC, as you said, everything that was under that umbrella was a fighter. And everybody who flew the airplanes under that umbrella were fighter pilots. I've actually had this conversation with Casey Campbell, who was a guest on a very popular episode a couple of years ago. She calls herself a fighter pilot as an A-10 driver, and she calls A-10 squadrons fighter squadrons, which looks wrong to my eye, but as you've just explained, that makes sense within that culture. Now, like we said, you started life as an A-7 pilot, very comfortable in your skin as an attack pilot. At what point in your career did you get rid of your A-7s and transition to F-18s?
After my first tour, I was in VA-82 in the mid 80s, and then went to shore duty at VFA 106, and so which is the FA-18 Fleet Replacement Squadron at Cecil Field. It had stood up several years earlier, so I learned how to fly the Hornet first, and then I rolled back in as an instructor, and I was a landing signal officer as my specialty. Um, so what is that? This is a VFA squadron now, strike fighter. And so we referred to ourselves as strike fighter pilots, or I did, and we had a lot of cross pollination. We had many Marine F4 guys that came down to Cecil that were instructors in this new FA-18. Attack guys like me in the A-7 community. A handful, two or three F-14 guys from Oceania had come down to stand up this new community, and it was a wonderful thing to get the goods from all these different communities and meld them in to this. So throughout my career, I referred to the Hornet as the FA-18. I never or very rarely, if ever, said the F-18. I would tell everyone regarding the FA-18 Hornet, the airplane is equally at home in the fighter missions, air superiority, intercepting, dogfighting, as it is in the air to the ground or now air to surface missions, which is to bombs, missiles, suppression, things like that. So it pure multi-role and embrace that.
Well, when you talk about the A-7 guys that transferred over to the FA-18, culturally, what happened to the community as you did more dogfighting? Certainly in the A-7, you did some basic fighter maneuvers, defensive BFM kind of stuff, but not the level of 1v1s, 2v2s, many v manys that you did in the Hornet. So how did the community morph to sort of accept the idea that there was an F now in the designation and not just an A?
My FRS instructors, who were Marine Phantom guys and Navy Tomcat guys that had grown up in this community, are teaching me things like energy management. Certainly, all the envelopes of the weapons. I mean, we carried sidewinders in the A-7, and we had a gun. And yes, we'd mix it up with the Tomcats or the A6s or other A7s, right before recovery time in Indian country, as we called it. But to actually be instructed by these guys on how to set up the briefing room for a brief and how to debrief, it was wonderful. And Top Gun at that point was still in California, and squadrons would send their experts to Top Gun. They'd come back, but then oftentimes those guys rolled to shore duty, to FRS duty, and so there they were to instruct guys like me. So a steep learning curve for me in the air to air arena. And then toward the end of my tour in BFM 106, I was qualified to teach in BFM basic fighter maneuvers, and then in fighter weapons, intercept using the radar missiles, and then going to the merge and cleaning up there. We then had all those tools, the terrific radar, FLIR, later in the 90s, night vision goggles, so just tremendous hardware advances that we could then build tactics from in the air-to-air arena. So really enjoyed that mission, but never lost track of really, why we were there is to project power, and which what we did in the 1990s and into this century. Certainly, you're going to carry something and deliver it, and you might escort yourself, or you might have some dedicated F-14s or FA-18s in a fighter sweep role nearby. But that's the reason that you're there, and this gets back to the community pride thing. I mean, the fighter guys make great movies, and they are great. Really enjoy watching them and look forward to the next one. Attack guys make history. The number of Medal of Honor recipients in the Vietnam War, attack guys. So we can go through that. We all take pride in our communities, and it's fun. But really enjoyed learning that fighter mission. Really a tremendous learning experience through terrific instructors.
I'll just say that Bridges of Toko Ri is a movie about attack pilots, and that's a great movie. The other thing that comes to mind, I remember the first time that I cruised with Hornets in the air wing. It was my third deployment. It was the deployment that you and I did together on Eisenhower in CAG 7 back in the early 90s. And while we could dismiss you guys as glorified A7 drivers, all it took was a couple of intercepts or 1v1s to realize that in the hands of a talented carrier aviator, this was a very capable platform. Further, the radar that even the first gen version of the Hornet had was very capable out of the notch, and you guys had AMRAAM. So as we were doing air-to-air intercepts, we realized that this was a formidable platform in the air-to-air arena, and that sort of muted our sort of judgment of what this culture was that had been given this gift of a very capable airplane. The other thing that I'm thinking of as you're talking is, as the Tomcat went through its life, and as we've documented on the channel in a number of episodes, we became a dumb bomber, which was always resident to the airplane, just never exploited until it had to be because of the fact that the A-6 went away. And then we became a very capable precision bomber by strapping the lantern pod onto the airplane. And that's what made this airplane super lethal and had great utility in the post 9/11 conflicts. Ironically, at the very end of the Tomcat's life, it was more lethal than it had ever been, and also safer than it had ever been. But just talking about the precision munitions capability. And at that point, the question could be, so now did the Tomcat pilots consider themselves attack pilots, like big A, little f, or what? And I don't think we ever got away from calling ourselves fighter guys. And so it's sort of like, okay, the reverse is true as well. So this introduces what happens along the way. So in the course of this thread that was created by that original tweet about Mark Kelly being an attack pilot, people said, well, he went to TPS, test pilot school. And at test pilot school, he flew all manner of F series airplanes, including the Hornet. And oh, by the way, he was an astronaut. So what up? Again, they're assuming that I'm judging being an attack pilot as subordinate to being a fighter pilot when I'm just trying to make the distinction. So, in terms of the rules, it's sort of like at some point, your identity, absent transitioning to an airplane that is a strike fighter, your identity is forged in what you flew in the fleet. And again, I think this classification is perhaps dated now that everybody is either flying Hawkeyes or some form of the Super Hornet, including the Growler or Seahawks, right? So you basically have three kinds of pilots.
And the F-35.
Oh, yeah, and the F-35 as well. So you either have AEW pilots, Hawkeye pilots, helicopter pilots, or fighter pilots. And maybe if there was more precision, they would say we're strike fighter pilots. I like that distinction you made. Or electronic attack pilots. But I'm imagining a Growler guy in an O Club is probably like, I'm a fighter pilot. And I don't think I have any quarrel with that, especially in light of the fact that the first Growler on Ike shot down an air target during that deployment that they just finished while the airplanes were in the Red Sea. But back in the day, your first tour sort of forged your identity in terms of these classifications, right? So Mark Kelly, and the other thing that's happening is people are confusing the twins. So Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly, his brother Scott Kelly, who I've had on the channel a number of times. He and I flew together in VF-143 aboard Ike. You waved him as CAG paddles a number of times. He went on from that tour to go to test pilot school with Mark, his brother, and they were accepted as astronauts at the same time. And it was sort of this experiment. They intended to do some, okay, one twin's in space, the other one's at home. What changes in their body chemistry sort of stuff. They both had amazing careers as naval officers and astronauts. Mark has gone on to be a senator. Scott is doing all kinds of things, speaking engagements, philanthropy. He's, as documented on the channel, supporting Ukraine in a variety of ways. They're both amazing human beings and very accomplished Americans, but don't confuse them. Mark was an A-6 Intruder pilot who did participate in Desert Storm. He was on Midway. In VA, I think it was 115 was the squadron he was in aboard Midway. And from that tour, he went to TPS. And so now, because he didn't fly the Hornet in the fleet, never mind TPS, or whatever he flew while an astronaut, right? They're flying T-38s or whatever else to keep their proficiency going. In my mind, he's an attack pilot, right? And I think that's the way that you would see it as well.
Exactly, and I believe that he would probably take that mantle. I imagine he got 1,000 hours in the A6 in his first tour, and other than the space shuttle, he probably has more hours in the A6 than anything else. But again, going back to the Air Force, I think even within the ranks, even at an Air Force O Club, an FB 111 aardvark pilot is going to identify as a fighter pilot. And we, no, I don't think so. I mean, maybe you made an intercept once, but I think you've got, and even you Strike Eagle pilots. I mean, and God bless you for what you do. We needed to do what you do, but you've got a terrific air to surface mission, and and that's what you do. So we know that. But again, to Aunt Betsy, sure, you're a fighter pilot, and that's fine.
However, here on this channel, we do obsess about these distinctions.
We do obsess.
And it's because it was a big part of our lives. And this is why I created the channel. And I felt it was important as my civic duty as we enter into this political season to stymie this error right from the outset. So that's why I wanted to have you on to dance these angels on the head of a pin as we have in this case. So Hozer, thanks as always for joining us with your level of expertise and helping us explain the difference between fighter and attack. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Enjoy it, Mooch. Thank you.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you do not miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.